sends to your Jewish students. Mr. Schill, you cut a disgraceful deal with the encampment that prompted 7 Jewish members of your own Anti-Semitism Advisory Committee to resign in protest. You and President Holloway struck deals that guaranteed jobs and admissions to Palestinians in apparent violation of federal anti-discrimination laws. I'd like to know how you think your quotas comply with the Civil Rights Act. Those who are in charge of universities who negotiate with pro-terror protesters are not doing their jobs. Taxpayer dollars have no business funding universities without principles that align with the principles of this country. Each of you refused to enforce your own rules, preserve campus safety, and protect Jewish students. Finally, I want to make one thing clear. The purpose of these hearings is not to enact right-wing cancel culture as purported by the left. The purpose is to end anti-Semitic violence and harassment on campus. Full stop. Hearings with college presidents are meant to help guide post-secondary education policies going forward that meet the needs and respect the rights of all students. We will certainly keep your answers to our questions in mind as the committee conducts further business. With that, I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank our witnesses for appearing today. There's no question that we can do more to combat anti-Semitism, not just on college campuses, but everywhere. No one should be threatened, harassed, or attacked because of who they are or who they worship. Moreover, students cannot learn if they feel unsafe. Yet here we are for the 5th time in 6 months holding another hearing to complain about the problem of anti-Semitism, but no work is being done to find a meaningful solution to address animus on college campuses. Complaining about a problem is not a solution. It certainly riles people up, generates a lot of media coverage, but it doesn't solve anything. To the best of my knowledge, the only change that has resulted from these hearings is that a handful of individuals have lost their jobs. Schools have had to dedicate hours that they could have spent working to combat discrimination on campus instead of responding to the majority's the legal requests, and law firms advising college presidents have made a lot of money preparing their clients to testify in these hearings. In 2017, after white supremacists marched through the grounds of the University of Virginia, chanting slogans such as, "Jews will not replace us," I wrote a letter to my Republican colleagues asking for a hearing to discuss rising tensions and discrimination on college campuses. Regrettably, the committee did not hold any such hearings, and we did not address the issue at the time. Jewish students, in fact, all students, have a right to attend college free from hostility and in compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There's no excuse for anti-Semitism on campus, and everyone is entitled to a safe harbor, and this is why we should ensure that the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights has the resource it needs to investigate where campuses are failing to protect against anti-Semitic acts or otherwise not protecting against civil rights violations. And I believe we should increase funding for that office in light of the increased number of complaints. But last year, my Republican colleagues called for a 25% cut in funding for that office. This would have been a significant impediment for the Department of Education's efforts to investigate these issues. Meanwhile, DEI programs, which try to bring people together, are being disparaged and eliminated. But as I've said before, hateful incidents of anti-Semitism do not happen in isolation. They're the byproduct of this country's century-long history of white supremacy and anti-Semitism. And we cannot feign surprise at hate speech on our college campuses. And I'll note again that campuses are polarized, as is our society. We've unfortunately seen a disturbing rise in incidents not only of anti-Semitism, but also Islamophobia, racism, homophobia, and all other forms of hate, and all of which need to be addressed. But as Mr. Lawrence notes in his testimony today, colleges and universities exist to examine complex issues, challenges, and ideas to provide a forum in which issues and opinions can be explored and can be debated. Freedom of inquiry and expression must include the right to protest. And he also notes that the limits of this expression are reached when actual threats or undue disruption of the university's operations are involved. No one in this panel is advocating for violence, harassment, or disruption of the university's operations, but students have the right to peacefully protest and express their opinions, regardless of whether or not those opinions are politically unpopular or morally abhorrent. In public colleges and universities, two of which are with us today, the First Amendment protects both popular and agreeable speech and speech that people can reasonably disagree with, including sometimes hateful words. But again, in painting with a broad brush, the majority has attempted to remove any distinction between hate speech and genuine political protest. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that the civil rights movement of years past has always moved public opinion rather than just waiting it for change. Today, 81% of Americans report a favorable opinion of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But in 1966, a Gallup survey found that nearly 2/3 of Americans had an unfavorable opinion of Dr. King. 2 years later, in the immediate aftermath of his assassination, another survey found that roughly 1/3 of Americans felt that he brought it on himself. In closing, as members of Congress, we have the responsibility to hold ourselves to a higher standard and be role models for our communities. By fueling culture wars, as I believe these hearings have done, we're setting an example for others to feed into and continue to escalate the tensions on college campuses. To that end, our students deserve more from us. They deserve a thoughtful, deliberate conversation about the constitutional questions before us that can lead to a meaningful change, and I hope my colleagues will rise to that challenge. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m., 14 days after the date of this hearing, which is June 6, 2024. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I now turn to the introduction of our witnesses, and I recognize Ms. Bonamici to introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael Schill is Northwestern University's 17th president. He also serves as a professor of law at the Northwestern Pritzker School of Law and a professor of finance and real estate in the Kellogg School of Management. He previously spent 7 years as president of my alma mater, the University of Oregon. He has also served as dean and professor at the law schools of University of Chicago and UCLA, and has also held tenured faculty positions at New York University and the University of Pennsylvania. President Schill founded NYU's Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy, which has become one of the nation's leading research centers on housing. Welcome to the committee, President Schill.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. Our second witness is Dr. Jonathan Holloway, who's the president of Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Our next witness is Mr. Frederick Lawrence, who's the secretary and CEO of the Phi Beta Kappa Society, located in Washington, D.C. Our final witness is Dr. Gene Block, who's the chancellor of UCLA in Los Angeles, California. We thank you for being here today and look forward to your testimony. I will remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements, which will appear in full in the hearing record. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, I ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 5-minute summary of your written statement. I also remind the witnesses to be aware of the responsibility to provide accurate information to the committee. I will first recognize President Schill for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee, and also thank you, Representative Bonamici, for that kind introduction. I agree with the committee that anti-Semitism is rising on college campuses, including our own. This committee is also right to be shining a light on the subject for the American people. In that spirit, let me address 4 issues as they relate to Northwestern: anti-Semitism on campus, our guiding principles of community safety and academic freedom, the encampment itself, and our plans moving forward. First, our universities are on the front lines of the disturbing spike in anti-Semitism that accelerated following Hamas's horrific terrorist attacks on October 7th. Across the country, the open harassment and intimidation of Jewish people on the streets and social media has also infected our classrooms and our campuses. As the descendant of Holocaust victims and survivors, rising anti-Semitism in the world affects and alarms me personally. I lost relatives in the Holocaust, so it is not abstract to me that the world's Jewish population has not recovered to where it was before World War II. The fact that Israel is a cherished homeland is not theoretical to me. It is where family members who survived the war found refuge. My family's history is a constant reminder to me of what can happen when anti-Semitism is allowed to take root. Where there is conduct that threatens the Northwestern community, we must impose discipline, and we have done so. Yet I'll be the first to admit our existing rules and policies are falling short. We must improve our processes to meet the current challenge. At my direction, we'll be working over the summer to update our student conduct code. These new policies will be in place before students return to campus. We are confident we can continue to promote 2 principles at the core of our mission: free expression and academic freedom, while disciplining harassment and intimidation. I want to take a moment to address the encampment at Northwestern and the choices we made. On the morning of April 25th, an encampment was erected on Deering Meadow, an iconic gathering space at the center of our campus. As I watched what was unfolding and at encampments across the country, I believed that the danger it posed grew every day it stayed up. Every day brought new reports of intimidation and harassment. And then on April 28th, the day before the tents came down, the threat of confrontation escalated with the addition of outsiders to the university. For the safety of our entire community, I knew I had to act. We had 3 options to do so. First option was letting the tents stay up indefinitely. We never seriously considered this option. They were a threat to our community. The encampment was breaking our rules. There was anti-Semitic behavior that was making our Jewish students feel unsafe. I knew we had to take down the encampment and get it down quickly and permanently. Second, sending in our student affairs officers and the Northwestern Police Department to make arrests. That was the second option. This option ended up posing too high a risk to our students, staff, and police officers. There were limited law enforcement resources available to the university, and it also created, as we saw around the country, escalation, renewed encampments. Finally, talking with the students about leaving voluntarily. This was the path we took, and the encampment came down in just 5 days. We did not give in to any of the protesters' demands, and the commitments we made are consistent with our values. Importantly, I rejected the main student demand for divestment and will not ever recommend that Northwestern use its resources for political purposes. By engaging students with dialogue instead of force, we modeled the behavior we want to apply going forward. Now, going forward, I want to make every one of you know, I am personally committed to fighting anti-Semitism. We are going to reconstitute a task force that will benefit from the information from other task forces. We will revise our student code. We will enhance enforcement. We will increase our security. And we will do what we do best, teaching our students about the dangers of anti-Semitism. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize President Holloway for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Jonathan Holloway, and I'm the president of Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey. To help you understand me better, I offer the following. My maternal great-grandfather, William Johnson Trent, was an early organizer of the colored YMCA in Atlanta and served as president of Livingston College in Salisbury, North Carolina. His son, Bill Trent Jr., my grandfather, was Dean of Education at Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, before becoming the founding executive director of the United Negro College Fund. Sure. May I start the paragraph at the beginning? Okay, where I left off. Even closer. Okay. His son, Bill Trent, my grandfather, was Dean of Education at Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, before becoming the founding executive director of the United Negro College Fund. My father, a career officer in the Air Force, was the first black person to teach at the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. I share this to make clear that a commitment to education and to providing access is in my DNA. And though I fully recognize the myriad ways in which my experience and that of our Jewish community are different, I know something about the awful impact of discrimination too. When I served as an intern for the House Ethics Committee, my father brought me to Capitol Hill on my first day. As we approached the committee offices, he said, when I was your age, the only way someone who looked like us could cross the threshold is if you were pushing a food cart. This is part of the reason this discussion matters so much to me. I tell you with pride that Rutgers boasts one of the largest Jewish student populations in America, and I tell you with conviction that we condemn anti-Semitism in the strongest terms possible. We do so today, we did so long before October 7th, and we will always do so. Rutgers, home to nearly 100,000 students, faculty, and staff, takes pride in being a public university. We conduct life-changing research and clinical care, and we educate tomorrow's leaders, many of them first-generation college students, and many of them from low-income families. What's more, Rutgers is world-renowned for its Jewish scholarly community. We are one of only a few dozen universities in America with the Department of Jewish Studies. Our Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life holds public lectures, trains teachers on Holocaust education, and hosts the Rutgers Jewish Film Festival. Rutgers is also home to the Miller Center on Policing and Community Resilience, which is dedicated to protecting valuable communities that are facing anti-Semitism or other forms of intolerance. The Rutgers Hillel and Chabad houses, both among the largest in higher education, sit in the heart of our Big Ten campus in New Brunswick. During my presidency, we have developed a formal partnership with Tel Aviv University focused on faculty collaborations. As part of that relationship, TAU researchers will have a presence in the Health and Life Sciences Center being built in New Brunswick. We find ourselves here today because of the devastation that the Hamas terrorist attacks have wrought. It is heartbreaking to think about the senseless and horrific violence of October 7th, about the hostages still held captive by Hamas 230 days later, about the thousands of Palestinian children killed in the war, about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza that gets worse every day. At Rutgers, this war has been a tragedy for our Jewish and Palestinian communities. Many in our community, searching for a way to curtail this tragedy, have turned to activism and protest. During this period of heightened fear, anxiety, and polarization, Rutgers has focused on 3 essential priorities: to ensure the safety of our community, to affirm and uphold our policies, and to promote dialogue and education. I'd like to emphasize this last point, dialogue and education. Disciplining a person for breaking a rule is easy. It is much harder to build the trust to question and to understand across difference. The battle against anti-Semitism, against bigotry in all of its forms, must be waged with education. We began this semester with lectures and films centered on meeting discrimination with humanity. In New Brunswick, we established an advisory council on anti-Semitism and Jewish life, whose work continues to be pivotal. Jewish studies and Middle Eastern studies faculty have brought Israeli and Palestinian students together in a classroom, not to convince or to change minds, but simply to listen to each other. We have planned training and discussion around anti-Semitism, and we have partnered with the Anti-Defamation League in these efforts. Like so many other universities this spring, we saw a protest encampment take shape on our New Brunswick campus. It lasted for a little more than 72 hours. When on the 3rd morning, some student protesters called for a rally to disrupt exams, we moved quickly to shut the encampment down. We made a choice. That choice was to engage our students through dialogue as a first option instead of police action. We had seen what transpired at other universities and sought a different way. Without compromising on my fundamental stance against divestment and boycotts, we agreed to talk and to listen. If ever there was a time for dialogue and a focus on civil discourse, it is now. We are in a highly polarized time where we are confronted by objectionable and offensive ideas. Part of what universities do is to help the members of our community navigate that reality so that they become better, stronger, and more resilient citizens. We do that by teaching people to be curious, to listen, and to engage in civil discourse. Finally, let me speak briefly to the Rutgers community. I have heard you over the last several months. I have heard your frustration at injustice in our world, your pain at senseless suffering, and your desire to make Rutgers a stronger community. And for that, I want to say publicly, thank you. We cannot give into the easy path of letting our differences become our divisions. The healing will take time, and through these efforts I mentioned earlier, I am committed to it. We are committed to it. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, President Holloway. Mr. Lawrence, I recognize you for 5 minutes, and I ask you in advance to pull the mic close to you. Again, we have a very inadequate sound system right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me today to speak with you. My name is Frederick M. Lawrence, and I'm here in my personal capacity to share my experience and thoughts as a former law school dean, a former university president, and a professor of American higher education law. The past academic year has deeply challenged all stakeholders of our college and university communities and our society at large. Images of campus protest and unrest will long stay in our minds. It is precisely at times like these that we must hold fast to the first principles that underlie the mission of American higher education and that form the bedrock of a flourishing democratic society and a vibrant culture. Let me first emphasize that the safety of students on campus is critical and it is essential. Students cannot learn if they fear for their safety. No one is permitted to threaten another. And a university is both entitled to and required to respond to violence or threats of violence. Similarly, students do not have a right to disrupt the operations of a university unduly. For example, defacing, occupying, or blocking entry to campus buildings is not protected expression, whereas protests outside a building would be. So what should our universities do in these challenging times? When looking at any issues on campus, we always need to keep in mind that the fundamental goal of our colleges is the creation, discovery, and sharing of knowledge. The intellectual challenges of campus life may come from many sources, including protest. That is why colleges should begin by presuming expression, including protest, to be protected forms of academic freedom and of free inquiry. Again, the limits of this expression are reached when actual threats or undue disruption of the university operations are involved. Universities must treat all members of a campus community as part of we, not they. There is no they where our students are concerned. We must encourage listening to each other, robust debate, and learning. Schools do best when they seek dialogue across ideological and political differences between and among the members of the campus community, and when they share a commitment to transparent decision-making. This approach is most successful when it draws on months, if not years, of conversation and engagement. I not only believe this to be true, I have seen it. I have had the opportunity to participate in the application of these principles on campus firsthand, including a recent free expression residency that was part of an ongoing campus-wide engagement on issues of expression, of community, and dialogue. During this time, I met with Jewish and Muslim student leaders to discuss their views on the Israel-Palestine conflict and how it affected their lives. I shared personal stories of a former colleague who suffered the tragic loss of his daughter and son-in-law when they were murdered on October 7th, and a former student born in Gaza whose family confronts the humanitarian crisis there. The ensuing discussion was not easy, but I believe that the students both spoke to and listened to each other. Campus officials have told me that these meetings continue in a spirit of cooperation, not antagonism, with the goal of advancing difficult conversations even where there are strong feelings and disagreements about key fundamentals. Colleges and universities exist to examine complex issues, challenges, and ideas, and to provide a forum in which issues and opinions can be explored and can be debated. Freedom of inquiry and expression must include the right to protest. As we seek productive paths forward, it is worth recognizing that this is not just a campus issue. We have seen increased polarization throughout the world, so we should not be surprised when this happens as well on our college campuses. And when it does, we have the opportunity to build on the critically important work of role modeling and of teaching how to practice free speech, not just with people who share our views, but also those with whom we disagree passionately and yet with whom we share a community. I thank the committee and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Chancellor Block, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee. My name is Gene Block, and I'm the Chancellor at UCLA. Thank you for inviting me here today. Let me start by affirming that all forms of discrimination, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, are antithetical to UCLA's values and corrosive to our culture. I wish I could say that our campus has been immune to the disturbing rise of anti-Semitism across our country since October 7th. Sadly, that's not the case. What I can say, and what I'll address today, is how we've been confronting and will continue to confront this challenge. Last summer, I announced my intent to retire this July after leading UCLA for 17 years. These are my final months of chancellor of this distinguished institution. While I'm saddened by the recent turmoil on our campus, I'm also proud of our legacy as a university deeply committed to the peaceful expression of differing viewpoints. To have a functioning democracy, we must be able to speak freely about the most consequential events of the day. As a public university, UCLA is subject to a dual legal mandate: the First Amendment obligation to protect free speech on campus, and the obligation under federal laws to protect students from discrimination and harassment. This balance is often difficult to achieve, and it has been especially difficult since October 7th. I'm fully aware that many of our Jewish students have had to confront rhetoric and images on campus that any reasonable person would find repugnant. Trust me, I understand their pain. I've lived it myself. As a Jewish kid growing up in the Catskill region of New York with relatives who were Holocaust survivors and victims. As the former provost at the University of Virginia watching news coverage of neo-Nazis rioting outside the synagogue in Charlottesville, where my children were called to the Torah. As the chancellor of UCLA, where an art show depicted me with exaggerated facial features that were reminiscent of caricatures of Jews during the Nazi era. As we all know, being an American means sometimes being asked to tolerate offensive and even hateful speech protected by our Constitution. But there are limits. At UCLA, we draw the line when speech crosses into intimidation, threats, and harassment of our community. UCLA has a proud history of peaceful protest. Before October 7th, we successfully navigated campus protests using strategies recommended by the University of California. But on April 25th, as a result of a conflict that spread across universities across the country, a protest sprang up at the center of our campus, testing the limits of our approach. We are part of the University of California system. We followed University of California policy guidelines that directs its 10 campuses to only use law enforcement to remove protesters when absolutely necessary to protect the physical safety of our community. Accordingly, the encampment remained. As the encampment grew to more than 500 protesters, some of whom were not even affiliated with UCLA, it disrupted normal access to some classes. On April 28th, I decided to remove the encampment after violence broke out between opposing demonstrators, and I asked for a security plan to do so. We gave the protesters written notice that the encampment was unlawful on April 30th and instructed them to disperse. But before the necessary police resources could be assembled, assailants attacked the encampment that evening. Tragically, it took several hours before law enforcement could quell the violence. On May 1st, with the support of the University of California's President Michael Drake, we provided protesters a final opportunity to leave. But when more than 200 protesters refused police orders, law enforcement removed the encampment that night. With the benefit of hindsight, we should have been prepared to immediately remove the encampment if and when the safety of our community was put at risk. We have since taken decisive action. I created a new Office of Campus Safety that reports directly to me. UCLA is conducting a thorough examination of our security processes. The University of California has also engaged independent law enforcement experts to initiate a review of the confrontation, including our planning and security protocols. Finally, we will hold accountable all those engaged in violence or violated our policies. No student should be threatened or excluded based on their beliefs or identity. While we'll always have to strive hard to meet this obligation, we must also maintain our commitment to academic freedom and free speech. The balance is central to UCLA's educational mission. It's not always easy to strike a perfect balance, but that must be our goal. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Chancellor Block. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question the witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I ask members to keep your questions succinct so the witnesses will have time to answer and not ask a question with few seconds left. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. This question is for all three of the presidents. All of your universities have been hotbeds of pervasive anti-Semitism. Please tell me how many students have your university suspended, how many students have been expelled for anti-Semitic conduct since October 7th. President Schill?
To my knowledge, no student has been expelled or suspended. We have ongoing investigations, and there have been terminations of staff.
President Holloway?
We have ongoing investigations as well, but I can report that we've suspended 4 people, and then 19 others are have experienced other levels of disciplinary consequence.
Chancellor Block?
Yes, we have, I believe, over 100 active investigations right now. We're evaluating 100 cases since October 7th of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia.
So, very few students have received any kind of disciplinary action from your campuses. Now, President Schill, you said some staff have received disciplinary actions. So I'll ask all three of you the same question. How many faculty and staff have you fired or suspended for anti-Semitic conduct or conduct related to the pro-terror encampments since April 17th?
So, Dr. Fox, if I might just correct the premise of your question. The fact that we have not yet suspended or expelled students does not mean that students have not received discipline. There's a wide range of discipline, and discipline has been meted out to many of those students, but we haven't yet suspended or expelled anyone.
Okay.
We have, as I said, I'm sorry.
Staff, how many staff?
I don't have the precise number, but we have had staff terminations.
President Holloway, staff?
And this question was since April 17th, ma'am,
Yes.
Is that correct? I don't know that we have suspended anybody from staff at that time, but we do have ongoing disciplinary proceedings.
Yeah. Chancellor Block?
Ongoing disciplinary proceedings.
Okay. Mr. Schill, in your deal with the self-proclaimed, quote, Northwestern liberated zone, You promised to reestablish an advisory committee on investment responsibility this fall. Northwestern Students for Justice in Palestine call this, quote, an important step toward our ultimate goal, divestment from Israel. Will you make clear here now that Northwestern will categorically reject any divestment or academic boycott of Israel?
I will make clear that I would never recommend to the Board of Trustees divestment of anything or any academic boycott of Israel.
Okay. Why did you agree to create the perception that you'd do so, which encouraged other universities to cave on this?
That committee is a committee that pre-existed. We had that committee for several years. We had already told the investment committee of the Board of Trustees that we would be beginning that committee, starting that committee up again in September. That was done months before the encampment. And so we were going to do that anyway, and there is no intent. That is not a board committee. That is an advisory committee.
Okay.
It has faculty and 2 students, and they're not necessarily from this group.
Thank you. Chancellor Block, numerous videos showed Jewish and other UCLA students being denied access to central parts of campus by encampment members who had set up unauthorized checkpoints. In some cases, the students were questioned on whether they were Zionists. Why did you fail to immediately clear these checkpoints?
I heard accounts, thank you, Chairwoman. I heard accounts of students being blocked, and we issued instructions to our staff to make sure that all walkways were free and the students could freely pass without obstruction. And that was, I believe, I then sent a memo out to the entire community on, I believe April 30th, instructing that that was intolerable and would not tolerate the blocking of access to parts of campus.
And did it stop as a result of what you said?
I believe it did, but we kept vigilant.
Thank you. Yield back. Mr. Courtney?
Great. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank
You're
you to all the
recognized.
witnesses for being here today. As Mr. Scott pointed out, this is our 5th hearing on this topic, which is perfectly legitimate and appropriate, but I think it's also important to remember we're an Article 1 branch of government whose job it is to authorize and appropriate the U.S. Department of Education. The Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education just reported in 2023 they had a record number of complaints for the department. If you go back to 2009, it's tripled in terms of the number of complaints, and a lot of those complaints involve anti-Semitism. But the staffing level at the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Education back in 2009 is larger than it is today. And as Mr. Scott pointed out, the budget that the majority reported out last year from the Appropriations Committee for the Civil Rights Division would have cut their budget by 25%, which I would characterize as the equivalent of defunding the anti-Semitism police. And again, I think it's our job at some point to focus on the fact that we need to beef up the ranks of that department, whose mission it is to investigate and to curtail this type of activity. Madam Chairwoman, I would now like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Norcross from New Jersey. By the way, could I have an article admitted to the record on that report?
Without objection.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney, for yielding. President Holloway, great to see you again. For those of you who don't know, Rutgers, the flagship university in New Jersey, home to nearly 100,000 diverse students, faculty plus. Second highest Jewish population, close to 7,000 students, and almost 7,000 Muslim and Arab students. Since October 7th, there's no question that the anti-Semitic has increased at Rutgers. In fact, we had the conversation year over year. It could be as high as 10 times what it was the year before. And you and I have talked about this. In fact, I called you at 6:30 in the morning when I first heard about Rutgers, quote, negotiating to end the encampment. And you picked up the phone, and we've had that continuing conversation. You know, I've spent my life representing workers, protesting. I know it quite well. I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment. But that being said, as I know and many others, there are rules in all types of protests, on college campuses, no matter what the reason is. So, and I participated in protests over my lifetime, and when I crossed the line, I paid the consequences. So what I want to dig in today is, what are those lines? When were they crossed? And how you reacted, how Rutgers reacted. Specifically, the encampment at the New Brunswick campus concerned, it was called Voorhees Mall. So when did you first find out that there was a protest at the mall there?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. There was a protest that had been approved in our free speech zone on campus. I think that was a Monday, sir. And then the protesters, and that's a legitimate area, and the protesters then moved down to Voorhees Mall. It's about a 3-block walk, as you might recall, and started setting up an encampment. So I was learning of it as it was happening on that Monday.
Were there any communication with the participants as they created or started the encampment?
Communication from me, sir?
From you, Rutgers police, any communication, or were they just allowed to?
No. For any approved protest, there's a whole process people go through in order to register their space and how they want to proceed. And we have student affairs professionals and university police, the Rutgers University Police Department, RUPD, and security. So they were engaged with those activists from the very beginning and in an ongoing way.
Setting the stage, this was a time of year that most students don't look forward to. It's called finals, obviously some of the most difficult times. Were the participants advised that the disruption of finals, in this case, or other activities would not be permitted?
The participants, it was made clear that we were going to allow the encampment and consider it a speech act in the spirit of First Amendment and free expression, but that encampment could not disrupt university processes, could not bar people from entering buildings, could not be disruptive in terms of excessive noise.
So I only have 10 seconds and I'll be able to finish the line of questioning, but certainly we're going to continue on this time frame so we can get a better understanding. Yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Norcross. Mr. Wahlberg, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Madam Chairman. President Schill, your President's Advisory Committee on Preventing Anti-Semitism and Hate recently disbanded after 7 Jewish members of the committee, including its co-chair and a university trustee, resigned in protest of your caving to the encampment's demands. You and your administration had cited the creation of this committee as proof you are working to counter anti-Semitism. But 3 faculty members you appointed to it had objected to the committee's very creation in a letter that downplayed anti-Semitism and defended the phrase "from the river to the sea." At least 2 of them have supported BDS efforts against Israel. Question: why did you believe it was appropriate to appoint faculty members who have defended and made excuses for anti-Semitism and oppressed and opposed the committee's purported mission of combating anti-Semitism?
Thank you for your question, Congressman Wahlberg. The number one, I'd like to just address the premise of your question. The 7 members who resigned from the committee resigned for 2 reasons. They were unable to reach consensus about what anti-Semitism was.
How could they reach consensus if you have people already having made clear statements that were anti-Semitic, that spoke for BDS and said that "from the river to the sea" is a good statement?
And they resigned because they were not consulted with respect to the negotiations.
Surprise,
they
surprise.
did not resign. I'm sorry.
Let me ask you, will you commit to keeping off those type of members of a committee if you reconstitute this committee as you say you're going to do?
I will be appointing to the task force that we are going to create faculty, staff, administrators who I believe are committed to fighting anti-Semitism and as committed to fighting anti-Semitism as I am.
We'll be watching. President Schill, one of the advisory committee members, Jessica Winiger, has been a leader of academic boycott efforts against Israel. She's also referred to, and I quote, Zionist media and condemned, quote, white liberal dialogue politics, and she signed a petition defending a Palestinian terrorist who murdered 2 Israeli college students in a bombing. Do you acknowledge Professor Winiger as grossly unfit for a committee meant to combat anti-Semitism?
I do not believe in the BDS movement. I am in print against it at my previous university, and I will not be discussing individual faculty members or their writing.
So you won't say that a person like her, let's forget her name, but a person with her principles will not be on this commission?
I will be appointing people to the committee who are committed to fighting anti-Semitism.
Your record isn't that way. You also appointed a leader of Northwestern's Middle Eastern and North African Student Association to the advisory committee, despite the fact that in the days after October 7th, the MENA Student Association released a statement explicitly supporting the terrorist attack, saying this, and I quote, "We resoundingly support Palestinian resistance to over 75 years of Israeli state-sanctioned violence and calling the terrorists killed in the attack martyrs." Do you agree these comments are shocking and beyond the pale?
I will not be commenting, and certainly not commenting on any student in what students
I think we're hearing that there's no change going to take place at Northwestern University relative to anti-Semitism. How could you possibly appoint a student who supported the October 7th terrorist attack to a committee meant to combat anti-Semitism?
I'm not going to comment on the speech of our students or our faculty or our staff. What I will say is that committee was a committee that wasn't just anti-Semitism. We tried to do something which actually turned out to be impossible.
We saw that very clearly. Let me just finish this. I think we've heard your response. In March, the advisory committee hosted University of Michigan professor Juan Cole to speak on Islamophobia and, quote, anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian biases. Fine. But Cole has made numerous anti-Semitic statements, including claiming that Israel, quote, was founded on a formal racial supremacist principle that Jews must rule the state. And that, quote, the only thing that Palestinians and their sympathizers can do to make Zionists happy is to bend over and allow themselves to be royally screwed. What kind of committee on anti-Semitism invites an anti-Semite like this to speak? And with that, sadly, I end my questioning. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Ms. Bonamici, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Once again, I reiterate that we must stand together against anti-Semitism and do more to combat the harassment of Jewish students. There has been an undeniable rise in hate speech, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, on college campuses across the country. And although I realize that institutions must be held accountable, continuing to schedule repetitive politicized hearings to attack college presidents will not solve the scourge of anti-Semitism. We need to work with experts on anti-Semitism, legal scholars with expertise in the area, people knowledgeable in the field who could help us determine what the government response can and should be to the increase of anti-Semitism and racial hostility on campuses. Mr. Lawrence, thank you for so clearly articulating the value of higher education and why it's important to promote discussion in ways that respect free speech while keeping students safe. And as I've mentioned in this committee before, the American Jewish Committee, Jewish Federations, the Anti-Defamation League, and others have expertise we can draw on. And because this is also a Title VI issue, let's focus, as Ranking Member Scott and Representative Courtney said, on equipping the Office of Civil Rights with the resources that it needs, rather than cutting their budget, as my colleagues across the aisle have proposed. And I also want to note, as I did recently in the subcommittee, that my colleagues across the aisle expressed concern about anti-Semitism on college campuses, but we do not see the same concern when anti-Semitic comments and tropes come from their side of the aisle. For example, Just a few days ago, the Truth Social account of Donald Trump included an outrageous video with Nazi-like language about a unified Reich. Did any of my colleagues on this committee call that out and ask the candidate that most of them have endorsed for its removal? It baffles me that some people are opposed to anti-Semitism when it's politically convenient instead of whenever it rears its ugly head. I'm also concerned about any suggestion that the first step to address protests should be to call police. It doesn't work in some cases, and as both Presidents Schill and Holloway and Chancellor Block noted, oftentimes many of the people protesting are not students, further complicating the issue. Northwestern and Rutgers both reached agreements with student protesters to address campus safety concerns while recognizing free speech rights. These agreements involved a shared learning environment that fostered the exchange of ideas between schools and school administration, actions that are directly in line with the university's academic message and mission. So, President Schill, in your testimony, you discussed how you identified 3 options to address the encampment on Northwestern's campus. You talked a little bit about why you made the decision you did, and that talking with the students was the best option. But will you explain how the final agreement you reached with student protesters de-escalated activities on campus and how that worked? And did the agreement address rights or protections for Jewish or Israeli students?
Thank you, Congresswoman Bonamici. So we looked at this. What we were experiencing with the encampment was a huge increase in anti-Semitic activity. We had things that we hadn't seen before, like complaints of anti-Semitism jumped up. There was a sign of a Mogen David with a slash on it put on Deering Gate. There was a picture of me with horns and blood, as all of you know. That's an anti-Semitic trope. So we made a decision, and it was making our Jewish students feel unsafe. So we made a decision, those tents had to come down. Those tents had to come down. We thought about bringing in the police as an option. That option turned out to be not possible to ensure safety. And my number one objective and mandate, when parents give me their children or lend me their children, I need to keep them safe. And I'm going to do everything I can to keep them safe, and bringing in police because of the size of our police force and the resources would have endangered our police, they would have endangered our students, and they would have endangered our student affairs staff. So then we made the decision to talk to our students, to model the behavior that we want to be engaged in, that dialogue rather than force. And we had a de-escalation. The tents came down right after the agreement was struck. The entire protest is now in conformity with university rules. We also there was nothing in that agreement that, just to be responsive to your full question, that specifically addressed the interests of Jewish students other than getting rid of that encampment, which was making our Jewish students feel unsafe. They couldn't walk through Deering Meadow. They couldn't pass Deering Meadow. They were worried about the outsiders on our campus, and we were worried about the outsiders and the threat that they entailed for our students.
I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. Ms. Stefanik, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
President Schill, the ADL released its report card for universities' responses to anti-Semitism, and you're aware that Northwestern was the only university whose grade was downgraded, correct?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And isn't it also true that the Northwestern earned an F for your failure to respond and combat anti-Semitism, and they called for your resignation? Is that correct?
I have great respect for the ADL.
I'm not asking your respect for the ADL. I'm asking, is it a fact that you earned an F and they called for your resignation?
I have great respect for the ADL. I am sad that they gave Northwestern
But
an
it's
F.
true. You got an F. Yes. Moving on. Let me tell you why you earned an F. I want to discuss what has been referred to as the Deering Meadows Agreement, your unilateral capitulation to the pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic encampment. But let's talk about what has occurred on this encampment. Isn't it true that a Jewish Northwestern student was assaulted?
So I want to question the premise of your question.
No. I'm asking the questions. You're answering. Wasn't
My
it true?
answer
No.
It is not a capitulation.
I'm asking the question. You're required to answer. Isn't it true that a Jewish Northwestern student was assaulted?
There are allegations that a Jewish student was assaulted. We are investigating those allegations.
Isn't it true that a Jewish student was verbally harassed and stalked to Hillel?
There are allegations of that sort, and we are investigating them.
Isn't it true that a Jewish student wearing a yarmulke was spat on?
All of these are allegations that are being investigated.
How long are these investigations going to occur?
Well, if you remember, the encampment was up just a few weeks ago. So we believe at Northwestern in due process. We believe in investigations. We believe.
So when are the investigations going to be finalized?
I'm not going to be able to tell you that. They'll be finalized when the Conduct Office and the Title VI Office, which are well on this issue.
This is why you've earned an F. Isn't it true that a Jewish student was told to, quote, go back to Germany and get gassed, end quote?
I've heard that alleged. Again, it is being investigated. We will investigate any claim of discrimination or harassment.
But it is a fact. You said that there have been 0 suspensions, 0 expulsions.
Thus far, with lots of investigations on their way.
You said something that was very important. You said we did not give in to demands, but the commitments we made as part of the Deering Meadows Agreement. You said the word commitments. Let me talk about those commitments. One of those commitments was funding 2 visiting Palestinian faculty for 2 years. Is that true?
This is part of a program that we have had. We have used it with Afghanistan, Ukraine. It's for war-torn
But isn't it true? I'm asking you. Okay. The other one is you will fund the full cost for 5 Palestinian undergrads.
That is also part of the program sponsored by our Buffett Institute. It is not a new program. It exists for people whose education and research has been interrupted.
It was announced as part of the Deering Meadows Agreement. Is that correct?
It was part of it. Was a goal set forth in the Deering Meadow Agreement. It will also include people from Israel.
Who was consulted when you embarked on the Deering Meadows Agreement? Was the President's Advisory Committee on Preventing Anti-Semitism and Hate consulted?
That was not within the purview of the Anti-Semitism and other forms of hate committee.
Was Northwestern's Board of Trustees consulted?
The chair of our board was consulted.
But not the entire Board of Trustees?
Our Board of Trustees has over 120 members.
And isn't it a fact that members of the Board of Trustees expressed dissatisfaction with your failure to consult them?
There's been some members of our Board of Trustees who have expressed dissatisfaction that they were not part of the decision-making.
Did you consult with the General Counsel of Northwestern or an outside counsel on the Deering Meadows Agreement before it was agreed to?
Yes.
Are you aware that board members asked you this question and you said that you had not consulted?
Not the outside counsel. The general counsel of the university was part of my team managing this problem.
Did you consult with 2 members of the advisory committee that I referenced previously, the anti-Israel professor Jessica Winiger and the Kellogg professor Noor Katili? Were they consulted on the Deering Meadows Agreement?
I consulted with several members, including them, but also including the Hillel director, and also including the chair of the committee.
Let's talk about the Hillel director consultation. Isn't it true that you asked the Hillel director whether it was possible to hire an anti-Zionist Hillel, head of Hillel, rabbi?
I did not. I absolutely did not. I would never hire anyone based upon their views of being Zionist or anti-Zionist. That is not what I do. That's not what a great university does.
That's not according to the whistleblowers that have come forward to this committee.
I can't say who has talked to you or not talked to you, but I can tell you
I can assure you many people have spoke to this committee.
Thank you.
Mr. Takano, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'll begin with a few questions for the current presidents. If you would please just answer with a yes or no if possible. My first question is, should colleges and universities be places where the right to free speech and free exchange of ideas is protected President Schill?
Yes.
Mr. Holloway?
Yes, sir.
Chancellor Block?
Yes, sir.
At the same time, do colleges and universities have an obligation to keep students safe from harm and ensure that they're able to study and attend class without impediment? President Schill?
Absolutely.
President Holloway?
Yes, sir.
Chancellor Block?
Yes, sir.
Have your schools taken substantive steps to eliminate discrimination, including anti-Semitism, as defined by Title VI? President Schill?
Yes, but we need to do more.
Got it. President Holloway?
I agree with Mr. Schill in the same way, yes, but we are always a work in progress. We're committed to it.
Chancellor Block?
I would say the same. We've made progress. We have programs. We need to do more.
Great. University of California, Riverside, which is in my district, was the first school in the UC system to reach a peaceful resolution with student protesters. Students had set up an encampment on Monday, April 29th, and following negotiations between college administration and the leadership of the protest, the encampment was dissolved peacefully within a week without a single arrest. Chancellor Kim Wilcox, announced the terms of the agreement in a letter to the UCR community. Classes and final exams continued, and the commencement ceremony will be in just a couple of days. My university is leading by example, but my Republican colleagues are characterizing any agreement made between university administrators and student protesters as, quote unquote, conceding to the mob. Mr. Lawrence, in your experience as the former president of Brandeis University, what are the hazards of immediately punishing campus protesters rather than opening a dialogue between administrators and students?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. There are two main concerns here. One, we always have to remember that even in these tense moments on campuses, we are an educative institution. We are educators. So the goal is to engage with students to the extent possible as part of the education process of all of the issues that are involved. Second, and regarding safety, you're always looking to try to find ways to de-escalate conflict to the extent possible. Understand that sometimes that's not going to be possible, and sometimes there are consequences that have to be pursued down the road. But you don't start that way. You start trying to de-escalate the conflict, and in my experience, reaching out to the students, to all of the stakeholders, and trying to build dialogue first with the administration and the students, and then among and between the students is the best way to reduce conflict.
So, Dr. Schill, was the encampment at Northwestern dismantled peacefully?
Yes, it was.
Were there any arrests?
There were no arrests needed.
And Dr. Holloway, the same question. Was Rutgers encampment dismantled peacefully?
Yes, it was, sir.
Were there any arrests?
No, there were not.
And Dr. Schill, did the agreement Northwestern came to with the encamped students, did that agreement remove any rights or protections for Jewish or Israeli students?
No, it actually gave them the ability to feel safe on campus because it was no longer there.
And Dr. Holloway, did Rutgers' agreement remove any rights or protections for those students?
No, sir. There is no diminution of rights and protections for Jewish students.
And I will say, looking at the UCR agreement, I do not see that any rights were abridged or removed for Jewish or Israeli students either. Chancellor Block, UCLA is an unfortunate contrast to what happened at Rutgers and Northwestern. Tensions exploded into an incident that lasted several days, led to arrests of many, maybe hundreds of arrests, and put students in the hospital. In hindsight, could you or your administration have done anything differently to prevent things? As Mr. Lawrence said, sometimes it's not possible, but in hindsight, might there have been another approach?
Thank you for your question. Always we're going to review all of our incidents and to see whether there was another pathway. We tried very hard to find an off-ramp for student protesters so they could leave the encampment. Wasn't to be. Safety became an issue for the whole community, and we had to ask all the encampment members to leave the encampment.
Can you tell me just how much time was actually spent negotiating with the students or dialoguing? I mean, was that possible?
Attempt was made first through intermediaries, through faculty, and then eventually our executive vice chancellor and provost actually sat in the encampment and discussed potential solutions, and was unsuccessful. So there was a real attempt for discussion, but unfortunately was not successful.
Well, thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. Mr. Allen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And first, I'd like to ask each one of you, the answer of the day is it's under investigation. What are these students doing while they're being investigated? Are they still attending classes? Are they still demonstrating? Are they still involved in this intolerable behavior on campus? Real quickly, what are they dismissed from the university until the investigation is complete? Tell me what's going on there. Dr. Schill.
I can't say for specific students what they're doing, but we are still in session. We begin.
Okay, so they're still attending classes, and we don't know if they're still involved in protest and everything else. Dr. Holloway, what about your university?
We had a very successful and quiet commencement had a very successful and quiet commencement 2 weeks ago, and students who are under disciplinary review are not on our campus. There's no protest at this time.
Dr. Holloway, what are you doing to those students who are under investigation?
Was that to me, sir? Or
no, I can't see for the camera. Dr. Block, Chancellor Block.
So during this period of time, students are still attending classes. I should emphasize there is no encampment, and there have been no demonstrations that are problematic.
Dr. Block, Section 185 of the California Penal Code outlaws wearing a mask to evade identification and committing a public offense. Why have you not banned the wearing of masks on your campus in accordance with California law?
Well, we still apparently are allowed to wear masks for COVID protection, and students continue to wear them. And
those are medical masks.
Medical masks. Yes.
Right. These are not medical masks. So you're allowing this behavior.
We've allowed masks on campus, although we have a policy this should be unmasked. But during the time of COVID, we allowed medical masking, and we've continued to allow that.
I'll yield to Ms. Stefani the remainder of my time.
President Schill, you said there's been a wide range of discipline. After testifying, there have been 0 suspensions, 0 expulsions, and you said discipline has been meted out. How has discipline been meted out?
Discipline has run the gamut. That is the discipline that's already completed. Run the gamut from meetings with student affairs staff at the very lowest level of severity up to disciplinary probation, which means if there is another offense, students will be expelled or suspended.
And you testified when I asked about the Deering Meadows Agreement with the visiting Palestinian faculty members. Isn't it true that the university committed to fundraise above and beyond its current commitment as part of the Deering Meadows Agreement?
I did not commit. I don't know who told you that.
Well, I'm reading it from the statement put out by the university that says, quote, the university commits to fundraise to sustain this program beyond this current commitment, end quote. I'm reading your words put out by your office.
That is a program that is not just about the Middle East. That is a program that is about war-torn areas all across this world.
But
so Ukraine, for example, would be
included. Isn't it a fact that that was part of the agreement to increase the commitment to that?
I don't think the agreement increased the commitment.
It did. I'm reading it for you. You put this out from your office. Quote, the university commits to fundraise to sustain this program beyond this current commitment. Is that no longer part of the Deering Meadows Agreement?
When I hear beyond this commitment,
I'm reading what your office put out.
Are you asking me to interpret what my office
I'm asking
put out,
you,
or
isn't
are
that the
you just
fact?
reading it?
What does beyond this current commitment mean?
What I read that to be is beyond this current commitment, the rest of the world and over time.
That's not, it's specifically focused on the Palestinian faculty members. Let me ask you this.
But we're also going to be including Israeli faculty members.
It doesn't say that in the
Israeli
commitment. Why didn't you include Israeli faculty members when you put out the Deering Meadows Agreement?
Because the Deering Meadows Agreement, which actually I never called it that, but the Deering Meadows Agreement was just a framework of an agreement that was reached with students at 4 o'clock in the morning.
At the pro-Hamas encampment.
If you would like to see the entire program, go on our website, and that will explain it to you, and you will see.
No, I'm asking you about what the university put out, there is no mention of Israeli students or Israeli faculty. Isn't that the case?
In the agreement that we reached, that there wasn't Israeli students there or Jewish students there.
Because they weren't consulted. Isn't that the fact? Jewish and Israeli students were not consulted.
Jewish and Israeli students were not consulted with
Exactly.
respect to
Yield
the
back.
agreement.
Exactly.
And it would
Yield
have been
back.
impractical to do that,
Expired.
Representative Stefanik, with all respect.
Dr. Adams, you're recognized for 5 minutes. I'm sorry. Mr. Norcross, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. To pick up where we left off, and the premise behind this is we were talking about the encampments or the beginning of protest. You know, what were those lines? When were they crossed, and how you reacted? So just to bring back context and certainly understanding that, you know, since that time you have, and I certainly have met with students, instructional staff, quite frankly, the union of the professors. But one of the issues that comes up and they're bringing to my attention is when the Rutgers Students for Justice in Palestine began to issue fuck finals call, which right in the middle of finals for an emergency protest at 7 a.m. on the 2nd. So obviously this is a heightened from what you suggested was a peaceful protest to something that's going to interfere with the ability of students to either attend their finals, feel threatened. Why didn't you order an immediate removal of the encampments once you learned that the participants were going to try to disrupt the finals?
Thank you for the question. On the day of, I woke up probably around 6:15, and that's when I discovered the Instagram post that you're referencing, sent out by SJP. Within minutes, I was in touch with my leadership team, and I would say roughly by 6:30, we were all on a Zoom talking about the situation. It was at that time that I said that the encampment had to go down. This is a wild violation of, across the line, to use your language, sir, a wild violation. And we decided then to take the encampment down. In order to do so, in talking with the chief of police at Rutgers, he said that the process would take a few hours to make sure there were a sufficient number of police there that it could be done safely.
So I assume you were in consultation. This is the Rutgers chief of police. Did you consult with your board of governors or with lawyers that you have on staff or others?
Our general counsel was in that group that I was referencing. The chief of police was dialed in at all times. We were engaged with him directly. The board of governors, I was in touch with the chair and vice chair, not at 6:30 in the morning, but at a reasonable hour for them to give them a heads up as to what was happening.
But is this when the negotiations started with the protesters?
The protesters, I discovered that they had sent in a list, I think on Tuesday, sir. This was Thursday that I'm talking about. Sent in a list on Tuesday, and then the chancellor of New Brunswick, who runs that campus on a daily basis, she and my chief of staff talked with 4 representative students on Wednesday, and then the agreement. This is the day before finals began. And the agreement was made then that we will be happy to talk with you, but this encampment cannot be disruptive. It cannot block access. It can't be raising noise. It needs to be silent because we have final exams tomorrow. They agreed to that. And then the next morning we discovered that they had broken that agreement.
So the negotiations then were taking place while the encampment was still there. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, yes.
So knowing that and I'll call it the agreement that was reached with the protesters. After that, why did it take so long to remove the encampment, even after the deal was done?
The students asked for another meeting on Thursday morning. That's when they learned that I'd already given the order to take the encampment down. They had hoped that we could have some further conversation on different points. I'm like, well, if you want to talk anything, you've got to agree to have this encampment down. We extended the timeline to 4 o'clock, and that was a matter of public safety, sir. In talking with regular engagement with the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey, when we sent out a request for mutual aid, they needed more time to make sure there were proper police there, proper amount of police. We had 125 police mustered, ready to go by early afternoon.
I think I heard you say you spoke with the Attorney General?
Yes, sir.
And why was he brought into this?
As I discovered, sir, that when I did not know it at the time, when police asked for mutual aid in the state of New Jersey and they asked for more assistance, that request ultimately lands with the Attorney General's office, sir. And
what was his reaction or suggestion that you do? Take it down immediately, wait, go?
He wanted to make sure that we had given, since we had allowed them to be there as a speech act, he wanted to make sure we would give them proper notice to that they were now in trespass, and then allowed time to disperse.
So the Attorney General said, wait till we tell them they're trespassing? Okay, I yield back to balance of my time. Thank you.
I'm going to say to the members, when I start hitting the gavel, I want to be respectful to the witnesses answering questions, but if I hit the gavel, no more questions, okay? Thank you. Mr. Banks, you're recognized.
President Schill, have you had any conversations over the last year about leaving the Big Ten Conference?
No. Leaving the Big Ten Conference?
No consideration,
No, we're proud to be in the Big Ten Conference. We're proud of our football team, and we're proud of being the charter member of the Big Ten.
Fully committed to remaining in the Big Ten Conference.
We are fully committed to remaining in the Big Ten Conference.
Last year, you fired the popular football coach, Coach Fitzgerald, after allegations of hazing in the locker room. You hired a law firm. You spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. That law firm came back with a recommendation to give a 2-week suspension of the football coach because there was no credible evidence that he was aware at all of the harassment or the hazing allegations in the locker room. You issued that 2-week suspension, correct?
I feel like this is a matter, as you know, former Coach Fitz is suing us, and you're asking for facts, and your premise is inaccurate, but I don't think...
Don't accuse me of that. That's,
well,
that's outrageous.
Wrong, what
because
you
let me get to my point.
Okay.
Because I think your performance here has been very embarrassing to your school. You, after 72 hours, you gave him a 2-week suspension, and then you received a lot of backlash from the left-wing mob, including a letter from 6 professors who attacked you and said that wasn't good enough. By the way, 3 of those professors were also, they also attacked you later for creating the Committee on Anti-Semitism and Hate. You responded to that left-wing backlash as well. So then you fired the popular football coach 72 hours later after you originally gave him a 2-week suspension. Here's what's relevant, Mr. President. You said that the decision to originally suspend Coach Fitzpatrick was mine and mine alone, as is the decision to part ways with him. So it was your decision alone. Let me ask you about Stephen Thrasher, who's one of the goons in the photo behind me. He's a professor of journalism at Northwestern. He and several of your faculty members locked arms. They scuffled with police officers, blocked the police officers on your campus from doing their job. Do they continue to teach students at Northwestern University after this embarrassing incident?
So I will not comment on individual faculty members
President,
nor on matters.
Is it your decision and your decision alone to allow those professors to continue to teach students on your campus?
We believe in due process at Northwestern University.
You believe in due process except for the decision that you made about Coach Fitzgerald?
We followed the contract.
Have your cake and eat it too.
We had an investigation, but I'm not going to go on and on about that.
Is it okay for faculty members at Northwestern University to scuffle with police officers, to lock arms and prevent police officers from doing their job? You said in your opening statements that this encampment was responsible for anti-Semitic behavior that made Jewish students feel unsafe to go to class. Is it okay for faculty members? Is it okay? Do they get away with that at Northwestern University?
I am not going to comment on ongoing investigations and faculty personnel matters. There is a rule at the university that is confidential.
That those faculty members would continue to have a job. Thrasher, by the way, is something of a professional prognosticator. In fact, he went to Columbia University to participate in their encampment, and you pay his bills. You're responsible for Stephen Thrasher's activities, which is really, really crazy. Let me ask you this. Are the Houthis and is Hamas a terrorist organization?
Everything I know suggested that Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Is it okay for professors or faculty members at Northwestern University to praise Hamas or the Houthis? Hamas, by the way, responsible for the attacks on October 7 that killed over 1,000 Jews and Israelis on a very terrible, dark day in Israel. Is it okay for your faculty members to praise Hamas and the Houthis?
And are you saying okay, meaning is it something that I would do, or are you saying okay?
Do you allow your professors and your faculty members to do that?
Our professors and our faculty members have all of the rights of free speech.
I'd like to submit these statements for the record, Madam Chair, of faculty members at Northwestern who have praised Hamas and the Houthis. And by the way, is it okay for faculty members, teachers to tell their students to go to the encampments or coerce them, push them toward that type of political behavior, to go participate and lock arms with the encampments and maybe tie their grades to that or make them feel like that's something that they should participate with?
May I answer, Chair?
You may answer.
Thank you. Our faculty members, no one at our school may engage in discriminatory, harassing, or intimidating behavior.
Madam Chair, I want to submit this for the record as well, these comments. $4 billion have gone to your university. We shouldn't give you another taxpayer dollar for the joke that your university has become under your leadership.
Time has expired. Without objection, your material will be submitted for the record. Ms. Jayapal, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Free speech and the right to protest are foundational to our democracy, and upholding these rights without allowing them to be twisted into weapons of hate is no easy task. And nowhere, perhaps, is it more difficult than on college campuses, places that help students to think, to engage, to broaden their mindsets, and to express their ideas without violence or intimidation. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-AAPI hate, LGBTQIA hate, and indeed all forms of hatred have no place in our society, including on college campuses. The history of protest on college campuses is mirrored in today's history. In today's protests, as college administrators, protecting all of your students and allowing your campuses to remain as communities of free debate is your responsibility. So instead of using these hearings for political bullying purposes, which is what the majority seems to do, and if you want to be embarrassed about something, perhaps be embarrassed about the fact that this majority has not been able to govern in this cycle without being saved by Democrats. I, for one, am interested in hearing and learning about what successful negotiation and de-escalation looks like in the context of protecting students and free speech. Mr. Schill, I'm a proud MBA graduate from the Kellogg School at Northwestern University. In fact, many of my courses were about negotiation and mediation. And you have described college presidents as being between a rock and a hard place in a recent op-ed, and certainly we see that. I agree completely with your eloquent comments on the need to fight the scourge of anti-Semitism on our campuses and everywhere, and I appreciate your own lived experience and your work to do that. You did not mention other forms of hate that have also arisen against Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students on your campus. Do you have the same level of commitment to fight that kind of hate against those students? And can you tell me what efforts you are taking to address safety concerns for those communities?
Absolutely. Any form of hate, any form of discrimination or harassment based upon Title VI or other rules at the university, we will investigate any complaints, and we have gotten complaints that sound in Islamophobia, and we will investigate them. We will also protect all of our students, whether on campus or off campus, and we will connect and communicate. I had a dinner for 45 Jewish kids, and I asked them about what they needed. I had a dinner for Islamic students and asked them what they needed. We are a university. These are all of our students. Everyone is part of our community, and I owe an obligation. My number one obligation is public safety and is their safety, because if you don't feel safe, you cannot learn. And that's what Northwestern does better than any other university. As you know, because you're an alumna, it teaches and it does research and it creates an environment for learning.
Thank you. You commented some on this, but I wanted to know if you had more to say about the options and the outcomes that you considered before choosing negotiation. You were actually successful in ending your college's encampment by peacefully negotiating with the protesters. Did you have anything you wanted to add about what you were considering as you decided to take that course of negotiation?
So, as I said, we had to get the encampment down. We needed to, the police solution was not, number one, not going to be available to us to keep people safe, but also may not be the wise solution, as we've seen at some other universities around the country. So we found, and we were fortunate to have students who were willing to negotiate and were willing to give up their demands that they came into us for. Their number one demand was divestment. We said no. We said absolutely not. We said nothing that singles out Israel. And then we said, let's think about what will make the university stronger, what will be important for your community. And then we came to this agreement over time, hearing what their needs are. And I would do that. I would listen to the needs of any community. And I have to say, most of these things, we had already been in communication with our Muslim students. For example, the House for Muslim Students and MENA students, that was already in conversation for a year. They had no place to pray. They had no place to eat and celebrate Ramadan. So that was something that we accord to our Jewish students, to our Catholic students, to our Lutheran students. So we want to meet the needs of our students where they are. And that's what the agreement ended up being.
I really appreciate your focus on negotiation and a peaceful resolution and protecting all students. Thank you, President Schill. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Jayapal. Mr. Owens, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just start off by saying that courage and leadership finds itself in the moment. And I must say, we, as a nation, we're seeing that it was not available. We did not see that in these college campuses. What I think we were looking for was strength, fairness to all, including our Jewish students, wisdom, and the recognition that hatred cannot be negotiated with. I'm really curious. I'm trying to understand how you have negotiations. And by the way, President Schill, would you have the same patience, the same strategy if these were KKK white supremacists that were trying to negotiate that was actually attacking and intimidating black people? Would you have the same patience with that? Would you do
Representative Owens, thank you for the question. I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals like that.
This is how you deal with hatred. I'm trying to give you a kind of understanding that we're talking about Jewish students. If it was black students against the KKK, instead of pro-Hamas, would you deal with them the same exact way as you dealt with these two students?
I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals.
All right, so the answer is no. Okay. Let's move on. I'll just say this. It's striking that you decided to negotiate a sweetheart deal with pro-Hamas students and professors who denied October 7th. Either they deny it, they celebrate it, or they simply don't care. I looked at that as pure evil. Mr. Shield, now, how much money has Northwestern University received from Qatar sources, including Qatar-connected entities at the Qatar Foundation?
The amount that we have received from the Qatar Foundation to fund our campus in Qatar, all of the resources that we have gotten, there's been a lot.
It doesn't take, I'm looking for short answers. I only have about 3 minutes left, please, okay? So how much?
I don't have the dollar number. You have a check that says.
Oh yeah. Let's say between 500 and
you
7
have a check
million,
that says that amount. Okay. Every dollar has gone to the operation of the campus or the management of the campus.
Would you mind doing me? We'd like to have a complete, transparent accounting to just how much exactly is coming from this. Now, are you aware this is the same Qatar government that has partnered with the currently harbors the leaders of Hamas, and estimated to have given the terrorist organization of Hamas about $1.8 billion. Are you aware of that? Qatar?
They are harboring those leaders at the knowledge.
Okay, are you aware that they? I'm
the
just
United
asking a
States
question. Yes or
government
no?
supports
Please, yes or
that
no?
And has
Are
supported
you aware
that.
1.8 billion has been given to Hamas from Qatar?
Pardon me?
Are you aware that terrorists have given that Qatar has given the terrorists $1.8 billion to Hamas?
This is not my area of
all right,
expertise.
You're not aware. Okay. Are you aware that the Iranian officials travel in and out of Doha to meet with Hamas?
This is not in my area of expertise.
Do you think, if this was true, do you think it'd be a good idea for the University of Northwestern to partner with a government that harbors terrorist Hamas and Iranian operatives who fund terrorism? Yes or no? Just yes
I'm
or no.
not going to engage in yes or no
so
answers.
Obviously you don't have a problem with that. Northwestern's School of Journalism is a formal partnership with. I'm sorry,
telling
my time.
Me what my views are.
A formal partnership with the Qatar media outlet Al Jazeera. Did you know that?
I'm sorry?
Did you know that your Northwestern School of Journalism is a formal partnership with Al Jazeera?
I, in fact, just found out about that last
week. Okay, well, let me make you aware of it then, because Al Jazeera, because of their pro-Hamas reporting, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, asked the Qatar Prime Minister to tone down Al Jazeera's anti-Israel incitement. Also, it was Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt that had blocked Al Jazeera because of their pro-Hamas mouthpiece. My understanding is that you have a contract with the Qatar Foundation that expires at the end of 2028 academic year, which now that you know about Qatar, would you be willing to, are you going to still renew that contract?
The review of that contract is being done by the provost office, and
okay,
it will
so
be,
it is. So I'm sorry.
May I just finish the
sorry.
answer?
These are really short questions. Knowing that Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece for the Hamas, are you willing to end that partnership?
The decision with respect to the Qatar campus is ultimately the Board of Trustees, and I actually am concerned by the agreement that you're talking about with Al Jazeera. And we are going to look into it.
Yeah, okay. This is an issue that I'm thankful we're pulling the curtains back, because this is not just beginning now. Obviously, it's been going on a long, long time. We're going to make sure we keep following up on this. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Owens, your time has expired. Mrs. Manning, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Clearly, none of you were prepared for what happened on your campuses after October 7th. And I have spoken with Jewish students, faculty members, alumni who have described countless horrifying and relentless incidents of harassment, intimidation, the use of Jewish tropes, the putting up of leaflets and the tearing down of hostage posters, the isolation of Jewish student groups, of Jewish students rather, forcing them to leave official student groups, from student government to dance troops. Students were unable to get to class. They were afraid to go to the dining rooms. They could not study. They had classes and exams canceled. What has been described to me has been nothing short of the normalization of anti-Semitism on your campuses. But this normalization of anti-Semitism did not start on October 7th. It predated that date by many years, and it reflects a failure to take anti-Semitism seriously, a failure to treat anti-Semitism the same way you would treat any other kind of discrimination. It has been fostered by years of teaching a one-sided anti-Israel view by many of your professors and by a demonization of Zionism, which is the centuries-old quest by the Jewish people to return to their ancestral homeland and control their own destiny. President Schill, why hasn't Northwestern taken serious steps to address the normalization of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist teachings on your campus long before October 7th?
So thank you for the question, Congresswoman Manning. I believe we are taking steps. I believe you are absolutely right. None of us were prepared for what we saw on after October 7th, and you have my commitment that we will do what is necessary to combat anti-Semitism, but we will also do what is necessary to educate our students in the evils of anti-Semitism as well as the roots of anti-Semitism.
And it's a shame that this disaster finally brought a recognition that that kind of education is necessary. I know you had an anti-Semitism task force. It had no experts on anti-Semitism on the task force. Will you commit to putting together a task force that has experts on anti-Semitism?
It actually did. We did have a faculty member who was a consultant to the Holocaust Museum, so we did have someone on the committee there. But we will definitely have people who are knowledgeable and who are aware of anti-Semitism.
And will you commit to training not just students, but also your faculty members on what anti-Semitism is and the dangers that it presents, not just to Jewish students, but to the foundations of our democracy?
I believe that's a good idea.
Thank you. Chancellor Block, same question for you.
Yes. So we admit that this is a challenge. And
it's been a challenge. I have emails dating back to 2014 from dedicated alumni who tried to alert you of the growing problem with anti-Semitism that was growing on your campus.
So we responded. We've tried to respond with education and obviously with enforcement where there are complaints about specific anti-Semitic events. We developed an online training module on anti-discrimination. We bolstered the part on anti-Semitism. We have an orientation.
Are all your students required to take anti-Semitism training?
They're not required to take anti-Semitism. The anti-discrimination module is recommended for all incoming students. Approximately 90% of our students take an online training for it. It's talked about at orientation.
And does that include anti-Semitism training?
It has anti-Semitism discussion. And
do you think it needs more?
I think we need to do more. I would agree.
And do your faculty also need to take that anti-Semitism training?
I think faculty could benefit also from understanding the challenges of our students today, and I agree.
Okay. And President Holloway, same question to you. By the way, I have been at college in my district, so I understand your roots.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to say from the beginning that we are living in an age of heightened discrimination and anti-Semitism, absolutely. The campuses are no different from the rest of the country, and any expression of it, I think, is absolutely horrible. What I also want to say